Are here with WRWK at the State Water Control Board, the hearing to discuss the possible revocation of the 401 all water stream crossing permits. The board decided about 45 minutes ago to go ahead and move into a closed session, and we will be taking comments from any of the folks out here that want to come and talk about why you came today. So go ahead and start with your name and tell us why you're here.
Okay, my name is Frida Cathcart, and I'm from Southwest Virginia, from Roanoke. And I drove up here today because I'm very concerned about the Mountain Valley Pipeline and what I've witnessed down in our area. Their criminal negligence is disturbing, and the Water Control Board so far has not stopped work and has not protected the people of Virginia. Trump's administration, the EPA, has launched a criminal investigation against the Mountain Valley Pipeline. A couple of days ago, a New York firm is now investigating them for securities fraud. So there's all this criminal activity going on, and yet our water is still at risk because the State Water Control Board has not issued a stop work now order, and neither has Mark Herring's office. And it is imperative that our state, our Commonwealth, protects the people, our water, our environment, our economy from thugs and criminals, and that's what's happening right now. This is not even about energy at this point. We could get into that as far as that this is not a necessary pipeline to provide energy to our Commonwealth. But what the people in Southwest Virginia are experiencing right now is a crime, and we need protection. And I am just astonished at the police presence here, the intimidating police presence that has come out. There's been a count of 38 officers in this room that are here, and people are feeling intimidated by the police presence. There's 41 state police cars outside, and I'm also outraged about our tax dollars being misused, because if they're going to use our tax dollars, they should use it to go and monitor the criminals, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, who is polluting our water by their criminal negligence, and that needs to be corrected immediately. And Governor Northam and his administration should be accountable for this, especially the police presence has to do with Secretary Brian Moran. As far as the DEQ and the natural resources, that's Secretary Matt Strickler and Director David Paler. All those people should be fired, or they need to change and start protecting the people's interests of Virginia.
Wow. Thank you so much, Frida.
Thanks.
Spencer. I lived in Richmond, and
recording you too.
Okay. Hello. And Virginia is my home. The natural wildlife here, Appalachia, the Blue Ridge, this is sacred to us, and this is of the most precious elements that we have in our life here, not to be degraded and disregarded as anything other than a business proposal to be offered and lofted around. I have family in the union, so I've also been a tradesman my whole life, and I understand the need to work. And it's incredibly crucial, obviously, because we live here and we need to take care of ourselves. But it's completely misunderstood and not appreciated. Forget appreciation, let's just defend it and let it to live, not the compensation of what we have. Thank you. Yep.
Thanks, Spencer.
I'm Socolo. I'm an attorney, a writer, an activist. I'm here in Richmond today at the State Water Control Board meeting to bear witness to see what the Water Board is going to do in the face of the civil litigation against the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the criminal investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Roanoke into their ongoing violations of state and federal law with respect to the pipelines. We're hoping that the Water Board will take its duties seriously as a citizen board and will take some action to shut this pipeline project down.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
So I did speak with Tammy Belinsky a little bit earlier. I did speak with Tammy Belinsky and David Sly a little bit earlier today. I don't think that we actually captured the recording of that part, but we did discuss some of the erosion that's already taken place around various creeks and other waterbeds.
Absolutely.
Areas that are becoming swampy, I believe. Caroline Riley was here. We were talking about her property in particular, where she's actually had to move her cattle like give her cattle away and move them to a whole nother farm because her own property will no longer support them safely. And so since you are working on some of those cases, would you like to share some of that information as well as this newest crime that's being committed in Southwest Virginia with the stabilizing pellets that are made from some sort of glue and potentially grass seed, and I don't know what else is going on in there, but is really destructive specifically to our water quality?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's really terrible. I've seen, I've been to the area, I've been to Bend Mountain, I've been to a lot of the frontline locations for the pipeline. The last point you mentioned, the pellets, is just absolutely absurd. There's, I think, at this point, at least 2 organic farmers who have been bombed from above, really, by these pellets. In one case, I think pellets went into his daughter's eye, and she was injured. No warning from the company, no explanation as to why they were doing it, no disclosure from the company as to what was in these pellets. They just came out of the air like an aerial bombardment, which is in fact what it is. It's really emblematic, I think, of this lawlessness that this company is engaged in. We learned yesterday, and I believe it was an article in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, that Mountain Valley Pipeline has already announced that regardless of what the Water Board does today, they intend to continue construction of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. You think about that for a second. We have laws and regulations. This company, which is not even a Virginia company, it's based in Pittsburgh, EQT, is publicly taking the position that if Virginia, pursuant to its own laws, revokes the what's called the Section 401 certification to allow this pipeline, if that certification is revoked, the company's going to ignore that and is going to continue construction anyway. Their, quote, legal, unquote, theory for that is they've got a federal permit, so they don't care what Virginia says. It's a lawless company. It's an absolutely lawless company. It's no wonder that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Roanoke is engaged in a criminal investigation as we speak with a company with that kind of attitude towards our laws, our water, and our air in Virginia.
Wow. That's stuff I hadn't even heard about yet. Here's one of the things that got me, though, because I've been following the pipeline story for a couple of years. One of the things that really got to me was hearing that the CEO of EQT, and that would be the company that's most responsible for this pipeline building,
correct,
that he himself called this project an engineering marvel, and he couldn't wait to see how it turned out because they had no idea how to build it.
Yes, that.
Can we talk a little bit further about how disturbing that is, that the man who runs the company responsible for building this and the company who is having to underwrite the building because no insurance company will touch this project doesn't understand how it's going to be built?
Well, I think what he understands is what's in the best interest, or what he thinks is in the best interest of his company's bottom line. EQT is not there to improve the water or the environment or even the energy, meet the energy needs of Virginia. EQT is there to make a return on its investment, which it's guaranteed 14% return on its investment by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We hear this stuff all the time. There's a parallel, I think, with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline that Dominion is building. Dominion is going around Virginia right now saying that the compressor station that they want to build in Union Hill, predominantly African-American historic community in Buckingham County, is what they call state-of-the-art. And I noted that because that phrase state-of-the-art struck me, and I was trying to think, where have I heard that before? And where I heard that before was a couple of months ago, a brand new pipeline in January that went online in I believe either West Virginia or Pennsylvania, exploded.
Yes.
After a landslide. And a couple of weeks before that pipeline exploded, the company, which I think was Transco, I believe, announced this is a state-of-the-art pipeline. Well, pipelines explode, and state-of-the-art pipelines have state-of-the-art explosions. And that's what is going to happen. That's the threat of what could happen in Union Hill. It's a threat of what could happen with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And it's very much a threat with regard to the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And with regard to your question as to being an engineering marvel, they've never built a pipeline like this. I've been to the front lines there. You're talking about, in some cases, slopes that are 90% grade. 90% grade, where they're going to use 20 what they call nails, which are basically steel rods, to try to attach it to very unstable land. There's karst underneath, which is basically Swiss cheese limestone formation. It's just unstable, which is why there's such a great risk here. It's not surprising that the CEO understands that it would take a miracle to build this. And it's understandable that they would try to build it with a 14% guaranteed return. What's absolutely unexplainable and outrageous, completely outrageous, is that regulators in Virginia would even consider allowing such a project to go forward.
I think that is also one of the things that I find really stunning, is that it doesn't seem that any of our regulatory bodies, nor the legislators who create the laws that our regulators have to follow, seem particularly invested in taking a look at how this is going to impact the actual people of Virginia as opposed to the pocketbook. Because I know that, the state of Virginia is looking forward to tax money that they're going to be reaping from this project. And I think that all of that money, the tax money is obviously going to come from the people, and the ratepayers, are going to be paying the bill for Dominion and their partners to build these pipelines.
That's right.
None of that money is coming from any other source, ultimately. And I think that one of the other things that I would like to point out for our listeners, in case they are not aware yet, although this is something that we have discussed many times, is that none of the fracked gas coming from Ohio and West Virginia is meant to be used here in the state of Virginia. It is meant to be exported.
Well, there's certainly debate on that point. I mean, that a lot of us have been saying that they don't plan on using the gas in Virginia. The company claims otherwise. One thing that's helpful to do is to look at a map and to see where these pipelines are going. Neither pipeline is stopping in Virginia. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline is already planned to go to North Carolina, and earlier this year, Dominion closed a deal to buy the major utility in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. So the expectation is if they build the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, it will go to South Carolina.
And they did submit plans to add another leg to the MVP.
Correct, a 70-mile, absolutely correct, 70-mile extension that goes from Virginia into the northern part of North Carolina.
Right.
The reality is, and this is not a controversial thing to say, these companies are for-profit corporations. Mm-hmm. That's what they're intended to. That legally, that's their responsibility. The gas will go where it will make them the most profit. They don't care about the energy needs. They care about the bottom line. That's what they're required to do. But that doesn't mean that Virginia regulators are required to salute that. We need to stand up. We need this citizen board to stand up for Virginia's air, for its water, for the indigenous people who will be affected by these projects, for the landowners who are having their land taken by eminent domain without any semblance of due process. It's really time for Virginia citizens to stand up and be heard, particularly for a company as lawless as MVP.
I guess, to the best of my understanding, I was under the impression that the way that they were able to finesse the paperwork to allow them to say that they had potential customers throughout the region was actually using companies that are already working for them or in conjunction, so contracted companies with Dominion. And so these people own, say, a few inches of a pipeline section, and so they're temporarily purchasing the product, which then reflects that there will be usage in the state of Virginia, yet we have not found any actual end users.
That's correct, and it's pretty much as you described. It's really an outrageous practice. What you're referring to is what's called affiliate agreements, and these are not companies that are independent companies or companies that were pre-existing companies. These are companies, and this is true both for the Mountain Valley Pipeline and for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. These are affiliates that are commonly owned, in the one case with the Mountain Valley Pipeline parent, which is EQT, and in the other case by Dominion Energy or Duke Energy or Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is their LLC that is behind this project. They create these affiliates, they sign agreements with the affiliates, and this is all perfectly legal. They go to, although it's not proper, and they go to FERC and they say, here's the demonstrated public need. The interesting thing, which your listeners need to understand about this, is when both of these pipelines went for approval to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the Republican appointees of that commission voted in favor of both pipelines and said there was a public need based on these affiliate agreements. Cheryl LaFleur, who's an appointee of President Obama, voted against approval for both of these and specifically singled out the affiliate agreement stupidity and said that FERC needs to revisit, in her words, reliance on companies creating these shell corporations to create a fictitious public need. That's a process that needs to be ongoing with FERC. The message, I think, for Virginia is which side is Virginia on? Is Virginia going to side with Cheryl LaFleur? We have a Democratic governor, all the statewide elected officials, I think at this point, are Democrats. Are they going to side with Donald Trump's appointees and salute these affiliate agreements to create a fictitious public need, or are they going to side with the Democratic appointees who pointed out that this is that there is no public need demonstrated for either of these projects?
Thank you very much. One more thing that I want to touch on, because you actually brought it up already, is turning the story just a little bit to the ACP and the compressor station that's planned for Union Hill.
Yes.
Because we were just out in Buckingham a week or two ago to hear Reverend Barber and former Vice President Al Gore talking about the environmental racism that's actually taking place right there in Union Hill.
Yes.
And we have a lot of the same thing, whether it's environmental racism or if it is classism in the case of Southwest Virginia. These pipelines tend to show up only in communities of poverty.
Absolutely.
That can't fight back.
Yes.
And Standing Rock is my favorite example, because that was originally supposed to go through Bismarck, and because there was such outrage by the population there, it got moved all the way across the state to Standing Rock.
That's correct.
And so we've actually seen the same things play out here in the state of Virginia, where they've had to move their line a couple of times. So we have this problem with the compressor station going on in Buckingham, but right now what seems to be holding that up is actually getting across the Appalachian Trail. Why is that not affecting the MVP pipeline? How did they manage to subvert it, even though they're crossing the same mountain range?
It does affect the Mountain Valley Pipeline. In fact, and I'm glad you brought that up. Just last week, there was a decision by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. A three-judge panel of the Fourth Circuit had thrown out permits for the ACP, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, to cross the Appalachian Trail in two national forests, one in West Virginia and then the Washington National Forest in Virginia. When ACP and Dominion lost that case before the three-judge panel, they filed what's called an en banc petition to have the entire Fourth Circuit review that decision. And what's really interesting, it gets to your question, is when they filed that petition, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is not a part of that case, filed what's called a friend of the court brief and said, hey, if you don't reverse this decision, it's going to directly affect the ability of the Mountain Valley Pipeline to be finished, because the Mountain Valley Pipeline made the same mistake that Dominion made. They routed the pipeline through the Jefferson National Forest, crossing the Appalachian Trail in the Jefferson National Forest, and there's no federal authorization for the National Forest Service to authorize a pipeline to cross the Appalachian Trail, which is why in the entire history of the National Forest Service and the Appalachian Trail, they have never once granted a permit ever to cross the Appalachian Trail on National Forest land. So MVP filed this friend of the court brief saying, please reverse this panel decision or it's going to hurt us. And in a decision last week, the entire Fourth Circuit not only refused to reverse the decision of the panel, they refused to even hold a hearing or consider it. They knocked it down. So the Mountain Valley Pipeline, you're absolutely right, is in the same position as the Atlantic Coast on that point.
Which leads me back to question even further their decision to pursue continuing to build, even knowing that they may lose their water crossing permits and they may lose the permit that would allow them to cross the Appalachian Trail.
That's correct.
And is that simply being done under the theory that if we get enough of the work done, you guys are going to let us finish the project so that we don't lose all the money?
That's absolutely the theory. What your listeners need to understand, and I know there's the legal twists and turns are a little confusing, but people need to understand this, and I'll put it very simply. Every single federal permit that has gone before the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals for both of these pipelines has been thrown out. Every single permit for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, every federal permit that has gone before the Fourth Circuit, every single federal permit for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline that's gone before the Fourth Circuit has been thrown out, which is why at this point with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline on life support, basically, they are saying they're going to either have to go to the Supreme Court or have an act of Congress to reverse what the Fourth Circuit has done. Mountain Valley is in exactly the same position. The only difference is the Mountain Valley Pipeline has actually been constructing in Virginia, because under the present state of rulings, they're allowed to construct on land, not on any water crossings, of which there's, I think, close to 1,000 in the two states where the pipeline is, but they are allowed to construct on land. this Water Control Board and DEQ in particular has statutory authority to issue a stop work order. I don't know what that legislation was passed last year for and was signed by Governor Northam, if not to apply to a situation where an out-of-state company has lost all of its federal permits that have been adjudicated in court, has been sued by the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia for over 300 violations, and is under criminal investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office. I don't know what more they need to issue a stop work. They need to stand up for Virginia and not be rolling over for these corporate criminals.
And so what do you see is the most expedient method to get this to stop if it were going to stop today? Could the State Water Control Board say stop work right now? Could the governor say stop work right now? Who has the authority to actually make it stop?
They all have authority, is the short answer. Governor Northam could hold a press conference at 2 o'clock today and say, I'm directing David Taylor to issue a stop work order or he's fired. Attorney General Mark Herring, who's counsel to DEQ, also counsel to the Water Control Board, could advise his client that you have a legal duty to issue a stop work order today. So Mark Herring could do that. The Water Board today could direct DEQ to issue a stop work order, or the Water Board could schedule a revocation hearing to be held at the earliest possible convenience to revoke the 401 certification. All of those are possible. Anybody who tells you nobody has the power, they're as distrustful and dishonest as the company that is building these pipelines.
Wow. Okay. So tell my listeners and our viewers out here, what is it that we as citizens can be doing to affect this, to get this stop work order to happen as quickly as possible? Absolutely.
Well, the only reason you're hearing about this, the only reason there's so much controversy with regard to both of these pipelines, is because citizens have been speaking out. So what people can do is pick up the phone, call the governor's office, call your state representatives, call the Attorney General, tell them that you want a stop work order issued right now. The more citizen pressure, the better. Letters to the editor saying that you want a stop work order, that you don't want Virginia's water and air rights, resources to be violated. You can speak out. The reason we're here, as I said, is because people have been speaking out. People have engaged in civil disobedience. There's been tree sitters. There's now a tree sitter in Elliston, on Virginia, on the MVP route, who's been there, I think, 150 or some days.
Wow.
People are taking all sorts of action, direct action, as well as through legal means. The attorneys are doing an absolutely superlative job of fighting this in the court. People need to speak out. This is our land. This is our water. When it comes to the compressor station in Union Hill that you mentioned, our viewpoint is we all breathe air, we all drink water, we are all Union Hill, and that goes as well for Mountain Valley Pipeline. This is one Commonwealth. The people in Southwest Virginia are our brothers and sisters. We need to stand up for them and stand up for our Commonwealth.
Absolutely. I do want to revisit one of the things that you mentioned. You said karst, because a lot of people don't know what that means. What we're talking about is the structure of the ground underneath the crust that you are walking on. And explain a little bit about what karst is so that people in Richmond, Virginia understand that their water is under threat, even though this thing is happening 300 miles away.
Absolutely. Well, I'm an attorney, not a geologist, so.
But I know that you've heard this. I know you've heard it before.
So with that limitation, it's very simple. Water moves. Water moves above ground. Water moves underground. Karst is a very porous limestone, and the water travels. It can travel for miles. It can travel for hundreds of miles. You put this pipeline in the ground. These pipelines leak. First of all, before they leak, just the actual construction process creates a lot of sedimentation and a lot of damage, degradation that goes into the water supply. But if, God forbid, these pipelines go online with methane, I think the average leakage rate nationally is 3%. 3% of the methane in the pipeline is going to leak on average. That travels into the cars, travels into the water. If you live in Charlottesville and you think you're safe, think again. If you live in Richmond and you think you're safe, think again. If you live in Norfolk and you think you're safe, think again, because this all goes into the James River and eventually into the Chesapeake Bay. If you love the Chesapeake Bay, you should hate the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and the same goes for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline.
No room for NIMBY.
That's right. No room for NIMBY here. It's all our backyard.
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. We're all breathing and sharing the same air, the same water, gosh knows, the same soil.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Sokolov, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate you coming over to talk to us today. And guys, get busy.
We'll keep up the fight. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'm Jenny Chapman from Preserve Bent Mountain.
I'm Mary Beth Coffey from Preserve Bent Mountain also.
On May 25th of last year, we were observing MVP cutting trees on our neighbor's 100-acre property. We were arraigned and charged with interfering. Out of that, we went to trial in July, I think it was, a bench trial. And the prosecution at the end of closing argument said that he felt that there was no purpose in pursuing, that he wanted to just let it drop. The judge, however, said, no, there is evidence of real interference here, and I'm charging them, I'm fining them, and I'll take it for advisement for a year. To which we replied, I'm not paying a fine. I will take jail first. I refuse to give money to a county that does not support and protect its citizens. The judge just said, well, if you're appealing this, you can take it all under appeal. So we did. And in our appeal, we requested a jury trial, that we no longer had faith in being tried by a judge. So that was put off until February. And in February, 2 weeks before, we had 4 witnesses, all good witnesses with video of that day, witnesses with recordings of that day. We felt very well prepared to take our story public. 3 days before the trial, it was nulle proseque. The prosecution said, we will not prosecute at this time. I guess ideally they have a year to retry us if they so choose. I think that rarely ever happens. I think it's over. And I think it's sad because it was the first jury trial that would have happened, and it would have really gotten the story out there of how MVP is just bullying people. I mean, really, look at us. We're two grandmothers. I'm 71 years old. How am I a threat by sitting and observing what was going on? But if we don't observe, if we don't pay attention to what they're doing, they're cutting things in places and testify.
Absolutely.
Yes, that things are happening that should not be happening, and we want to bear witness to that. And so we didn't get that opportunity to do that because it was nulle prost. I feel like that's a gag order in a sense. Now it's just been swept under the rug. It shouldn't be swept under the rug. It needs to be out for people to know what's really happening. And it's happening over and over and over. There's so much bullying. There's so many violations. And we just need someone to stand up for us, because when we stand up for ourselves, it doesn't seem to work anymore. But we need a DEQ that is responsive to its citizens. We need an administration that is responsive to its citizens.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Greg Kelly. I'm a sculptor in Richmond, Virginia. And someone in one of the workers here that is supporting these pipelines going in yelled out, well, how do we heat our houses? What do we burn? And really the obvious answer is hydrogen. California is developing a hydrogen technology. Hawaii is. I'll never forget an interview by Peter Jennings, Person of the Week, back in 1996. He interviewed an old North Dakota farmer who had changed his engine, or who added a hydrogen producing generator to his old Dodge truck, and it increased his gas mileage from 16 miles per gallon to about 40 to 50 miles per gallon. This was in 1996. So, for some reason, we have been completely dissuaded from hydrogen being a viable fuel, whereas it's all you got to do is run an electric current through water and you get hydrogen and oxygen. It would completely decentralize our gas network of all these pipelines, the 500,000 miles of pipelines running all over our country. This technology needs to be developed like yesterday. Hydrogen is actually safer than gas if it gets free. When it is just loosed into the air, it doesn't sink as a gas down to the ground like gas fumes do. It floats up into the air, so it disappears basically. It's the second most common element in the universe, or in our universe at least, next to hydrogen. So this is kind of a no-brainer, but apparently we have been brainwashed about this. You know, everybody thinks about hydrogen as, oh, remember the Hindenburg and you know how it blew up, and it's like, yeah, okay. But we're pretty smart people as humans. We could do this. We just need to put our minds to it. But if the hydrogen economy were developed, it would completely wipe out this unnatural gas dependence that we have. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming.
Sharon Ponton.
Hi, Sharon. What brought you here today?
I'm here to support the folks along the path of the MVP to get the water certification revoked, because they've lived through havoc and chaos and destruction, and it shouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And
what is it that? What area are you in?
I actually live in Nelson County, so I work for the Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League.
Okay.
And have been working against both pipelines for the last 4.5 years.
And is your property in Nelson County under threat because of the pipelines?
No.
Directly? No.
No, not directly.
But your air and your water quality are.
And our community is, because
your entire community.
Because it comes through
Nelson's
our county.
not that big.
No, it's 28 and a half miles of it come through our county.
Right. Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about some of those little factoids that maybe some of our listeners don't really know about. So when they go through and they want to put in one of these pipelines, there's what they call the blast zone. And the blast zone goes how far on either side of the pipeline?
Well, it depends on pressure, but it is 1,100 feet on either side, so you're looking at half mile, between a quarter and a half mile. And then the other thing that happens in rural communities is that the pipe itself is allowed to be thinner. Mm-hmm.
The pipeline itself is allowed to be thinner in certain areas than it is in others?
Yes.
I was unaware of that.
Yes.
Please tell me more.
Okay, so PHMSA decides all the regulations about actual construction.
Okay.
And that's the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. I have to think about it because it's so many words.
There's a whole lot of acronyms to know if you're going to talk about this project.
Yes, and so they set up what they call classes, and it's classes 1 to 4. Rural areas are class 1, and it's based upon how many living units essentially are within a mile. So, of course, rural areas have fewer homes within a mile.
Fewer human inhabitants.
Yes, and therefore we aren't worth as much because the pipeline itself can be built with thinner walled steel. The cutoff valves can be 20 miles apart instead of like in more rural areas that's much closer. They have to be within 5 to 7 miles instead of 20.
I really was unaware of those.
Oh, this is all true.
Wow.
There's fewer inspections required in rural communities. They also, one of the really disgusting things that PHMSA does is that they can come in and tell you where they're going to build the pipeline, and then they come to the county after the pipeline is built and say, you know, you shouldn't let development occur along the pipeline route in the blast zone because you're putting people at risk. But it didn't matter that the pipeline company came through and said, we're going to put your community at risk.
Right. That's a little backward.
It is very backwards. So, but I've been working along the pipeline routes in both the MVP and the ACP. The State Water Control Board made huge errors in December of 2017 when they approved these 401 water certifications.
And what was the error exactly? Was the error the fact that
the EQ.
Was the error the fact that they did not go and do their own investigation to find out how each body of water would be impacted?
Stream by stream would have been wonderful. Mm-hmm. But what they did was they listened to DEQ, and DEQ kept telling them that they could protect the water quality, that there was reasonable assurance that our water quality would be protected.
And DEQ was getting that information directly from the pipeline builders or the companies backing those pipeline construction projects?
From the pipeline companies.
Okay. Just want to clarify.
And the public had lots of experts speak at both the MVP and the ACP hearings, who said what was going to happen, and now it's happening. And within a month of the MVP construction starting was the first mudslide.
I have to tell you that when we talk about the mudslides, honestly, the storms that came through last summer, I really thought that just the destruction that came through in hurricane season would have been enough to clue in someone who wanted to say, put in a pipeline on a 90-degree hill, that maybe they wanted to revisit that idea. So I was genuinely shocked after hurricane season, which brought a great deal of destruction, even in Southwest Virginia, which is so far from the coastline. But, we know what Camille did there in 1969. And the fact that they didn't back off after that, I found utterly shocking, because then I thought, well, they're literally not concerned with the safety of the project, not even a little bit.
No, they're not.
Let's talk a little bit about why they're not concerned about the safety of the projects. And this is something that I've already discussed with a couple of other people today, but I would hazard a guess that it has to do with their profit potential.
Well, for certain, the company's profit.
Because they are guaranteed federal money, 14 to 15% of the money that they invest. They are guaranteed to get back from the federal government.
And they charge the ratepayers
as a means of having built, quote unquote, infrastructure.
Yes.
That is considered unnecessary infrastructure. Since the industry itself is earning less and less. Well, not earning less. I mean, the prices keep going up for it, but is producing less and less and less because the need is less and less as solar and wind and other renewable technologies come to fruition.
Right, and the MVP line from the beginning was we knew that it was going to go overseas, and so it's not of benefit to anybody in Virginia or anybody in West Virginia. It's going to be benefited to the company alone. It has no profit. It has no value to any company or any individual in Virginia because it's going overseas. And now on the ACP line, they say that it's not, but it's amazing that they have it. It's supposed to intersect with the Transco line, which can go north, and they can hook into Cove Point, which is their LNG facility in Maryland. And now it's going to go they're going to hook up and extend it into South Carolina. They just bought Scana Energy, and they're going to hook up and with the pipeline they already have in South Carolina, and it'll go all the way to Elba Island, Georgia, where there is another LNG plant export facility being retrofitted right now. So
by all indications, this gas is meant for export.
Yeah, because they've already told the SEC, Dominion has, that they're not going to build all these gas plants that they said they were going to build. And they already have the gas for the two plants in Brunswick and Greensville that just finished, and one is still under construction. they already have contracts with Transco for that gas. So where is the gas going to go?
And as I understand it, the Transco line would actually still carry everything that they're trying to get out of Ohio and West Virginia. It absolutely has the capacity to carry the product that is expected to come from this shale production. But that money doesn't go into Dominion or EQT's pockets.
That's right. And I guess I just want to echo what Reverend Barber and Al Gore said last week, and that these pipelines are scandalous.
Scandalous.
And they're racist.
Racist.
And they are reckless.
Reckless.
And they are a ripoff.
Ripoff.
That's what they are.
I hear you loud and clear.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming over and talking
You're
to us
welcome.
today. WRWK broadcasting live from the Doubletree Hilton at the State Water Control Board hearing. Go ahead and share your name and whatever your comment is.
My name is Tina Smoosh. I'm a retired physician. I have background in public health, and I research toxins that are associated with these big transmission pipelines. What we've discovered in our research is that the fusion bonded epoxy coating on the pipelines for both MVP and ACP is a Class 1A carcinogen in its original form before it's applied. And right now, we have been communicating with both federal and state officials that are responsible for potable drinking water in the state. I heard from our state health commissioner early this month saying that the Virginia Department of Health is taking this very seriously. They are doing their own research. They're using federal agencies also, and we should hear within a few weeks what they find. We've found documents through our research in various areas that show that there are multiple toxic chemicals that immediately leach out of these pipelines when they're submerged in a wet environment. And anybody that's been watching the news knows that many of these pipes are submerged in very high groundwater, and we know they're leaching out these chemicals. That's been proven. What we don't know is what is in the chalked coating that is deteriorating on the surface of the pipes as they sit out exposed to the sunshine. We have federal court testimony from the lead engineer over the whole MVP project worrying about the degradation of the coating, which is called chalking, because it decreases the integrity of the pipe coating. So as this material chalks off, it's a powdery substance, and we citizens are wondering, is that chalk substance similar in properties to the original powdered form that's applied to the outside of the pipeline? So there's many unanswered questions. We've met dead ends in trying to research this, but finally we've gotten at least one state agency that says we're on this too.
What agency is that?
Virginia Department of Health.
Excellent.
We also know that the EPA is now involved.
Excellent. That's good news. I have a question for you. The substance that you mentioned that I believe you said coats the interior of the pipelines, that is a Class 1 carcinogen?
No.
No.
This is the external coating on the pipe.
The external coating.
Yes.
That's even scarier.
It's 3M Scotch Coat 6233 Fusion Bonded Epoxy.
Okay. And so we know that the substance itself is potentially carcinogenic during its wet phase, I think. Is that what you said?
In the powdered form.
In the powdered form.
That is then reconstituted and applied to the outside of the pipe. Our concern is the pipes for both the ACP and the MVP have been sitting out exposed to sunlight far longer than the manufacturer's recommendations for this coating. The coating is now chalking off in a powdery form, and we are questioning, does that still have the same mutagenic and carcinogenic properties that are specified for the original product?
Wow. Wow.
So research by citizen scientists, we started looking into this I guess, July of 2018, it's been difficult getting agencies to acknowledge that the material we have is truly a threat.
Yeah.
So we're waiting to see if now the agencies will really find some definitive information in addition to what we've already found through our own research.
I have another question about any of those substances, not the gas itself, but the substances that go into building the pipeline or securing the pipeline or stopgaps, all of that. We know that they are potentially toxic in the form that they're being used in already in the application process. In the event of the unthinkable, that the pipeline explodes, what is the toxic fallout potential from all of those chemicals, not including the gas?
I don't know the answer to that specifically. What I do know is fracked gas, which is what will be flowing through the Mountain Valley Pipeline, over time deposits out radioactive forms of lead and polonium. So it's acknowledged, even in the FEIS for the MVP, that there would be radioactive compounds that would have to be removed once this pipeline's abandoned. So if your pipe exploded, and if there's a leak, there is an 80% chance that these pipelines will explode with any small rupture or defect in them.
80%? As in 80?
80%.
Wow.
Yes. We have scientific calculations from the industry that back that up.
Uh-huh.
So in the event that this already degrading pipe coating gets thin enough to impair the integrity of the pipe, any little rupture is almost guaranteed to explode. And certainly whatever's lining the pipe at that point is out there in the environment. And this is pipe that is going through people's groundwater for their wells and springs. It's going right by homes. It's going under busy roads. It's a serious danger. And the slopes that the pipeline is crossing are incredibly steep. They're rupture-prone slopes. They've got very highly slip-prone soils, and historically, there's plenty of documentation showing that there have been earthquakes and landslides
That was my next question.
through much of this area.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about with the earthquake potential that's in the mountain ranges on the western side of the state of Virginia.
Correct.
Knowing the kind of impacts that we've already seen on the eastern side of the state when there have been very few but very strong earthquakes.
Yes.
So when you get into the mountain ranges and we talk about the earthquake potential over there, and we talk about potentially a pipeline that's carrying a very flammable liquid gas
Yes.
down a 90-degree slope, that the guy that the CEO of EQT calls an engineering marvel, and he's not quite sure how they're going to do it.
Correct. This is what keeps me and many other people awake at night.
Yeah. And are you, you're directly out in the area yourself?
I'm not.
Affected by MVP or ACP?
All of us that have been working on this feel directly in the area, although
Yes.
I am not along the pipeline.
So it's not on your it's not going to affect your
No.
property personally? Okay.
No.
Alrighty.
It affects my community.
Yes, well, it will
and my
definitely
state.
It will affect your air and your water, regardless of whether or not it's actually on your property.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming over to talk to us today.
Thank you.
The whole pipeline construction. Tell us your name.
Tom Adams.
Tom Adams.
I'm a hydrologist, a PhD in civil engineering, and I've been actively involved for about 2.5 years fighting this. there's been a lot said about why the pipeline shouldn't be built, and they're all true. There's not a single good reason why we should have these pipelines, because we have alternative sources of energy, solar and wind, that the cost of which is coming down dramatically, that are very competitive with the pipelines. The natural gas for these are only going for export. But there are huge environmental reasons, not only just the burning of fossil fuels, but also the fracking process at the beginning point. So one of the major reasons in my mind that we shouldn't be doing this is for the contribution of burning the natural gas in producing CO2, and then there's also the methane released in the fracking process, contributing to global warming, which is a life-threatening thing that we're looking forward to in the near term. A lot of people are closing their eyes to the problem, and it's very real, and we're seeing the consequences of it right now. It's not just something that's going to affect our children and grandchildren. It's with us now, and it's only going to get worse. If we continue to use fossil fuels, we're only making the problem much worse for our descendants. And we are going to pay the price. One of the big problems with the use of fossil fuels is the true cost of using fossil fuels isn't included in the environmental damage that's done. So there's those externalities that we like to put aside.
For our listeners who might not know, what does a hydrologist do?
Specialize in water. I worked for 25 years with the National Weather Service doing flood forecasting, and I've done a lot of international work subsequently to that.
Okay. And so when you talk about your expertise in flooding, have you also examined the area that we're talking about where the Mountain Valley Pipeline is
yes.
projected to be built?
Yes, I have. And that's a really good question, because at one point in May last year, the State Water Control Board.
Just a little bit closer.
The State Water Control Board had a public comment period where you could submit issues about stream crossing locations, and they wanted specific stream crossing location by stream crossing location. So I set up a system where I could do an analysis and submitted over 300 reports to the Department of Environmental Quality, each about 35 pages long, doing a detailed analysis looking at two things. One was the increase in soil erosion that would occur at those locations, and also there's a huge problem that Tina may have just talked about in terms of if, well, maybe not with the stream crossings, the pipelines are buried under the streams only about 2 or 3 feet. And I did a scour analysis that looked at, with significant flooding, that the pipes could be exposed and could rupture, and you'd have a huge explosion. And in Virginia, there are over 500 stream crossings, that the possibility of that happening is really, really large.
That's a terrifying prospect.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us
Sure.
today and sharing your thoughts with us.
My name is Kira Young, and I came here to ask for a revocation of the 401 permits and to stop the work on the Mountain Valley Pipeline, because it is devastating communities in West Virginia, who are basically undergoing a Holocaust. And these pipelines cannot safely be built. There's no possible way for them to safely be built. Everything we've told the water board all along was going to happen. The mudslides, the waterways being poisoned by the sediment, excess sediment, all of these things have happened. And the issues with karst geology, there's simply no way to build these things safely. And this water board meeting about a meeting is the greatest display of fascism masquerading as democracy that I've seen in a while. So this is not democracy, but we keep trying to use the mechanisms in place for us that are supposed to work for us, but as you see, they don't. because last time they promised to have a hearing, this was in December, to possibly revoke the 401 permits because of the multiple violations that have been caught.
I believe it's over 300.
Yeah, over 300, and it wasn't because the DEQ was doing their job. It was because of citizens who got together and reported these violations. So we're having to do their job for them because this system is rigged. It's not an actual system that works for people. It works for the corporations. And the corporations work alongside with government, and that's exactly what fascism is. That is the definition of fascism. So I think we should stop pretending that we live in a democracy and create a real democracy instead of this this sham that we're undergoing right now. Because anything that makes it legal for people to poison people's water is insane. That's an insane system. Any system that brings in these workers of the pipeline to suggest to us that their right to work in the extraction industry trumps our right to clean water is a bullshit system. Excuse me. Am I allowed to swear on the radio? It's a scam of a system. Apologies to the FCC. But, it's an emotional issue because we're talking about our lives here. And here we are begging a board that isn't going to make a decision based on science and facts.
And it's a board who is largely responsible to its citizens to make determinations about water quality.
Right. On paper and in theory. But see, in reality, it's not. It's a board that rubber stamps projects. And again, is a masquerade of democracy and protection of the environment and our rights, our human rights to clean water. Those rights trump all others, including people's right to work in the extraction industry. They can find another job, as far as I'm concerned.
I think they'd probably make great solar installers.
They would. They would make really good solar installers. That's a fantastic idea. I need some solar panels in my place.
Perfect.
And I would welcome any ex-pipeline worker to come install them.
Oh, there you go. There you go. We've had a couple of challenges thrown out today, so there's a good one.
Yep.
Any pipeline workers that want to learn how to do solar and show up at Kira's house and install them, she's ready.
We're ready to receive you.
Kira, is your property either in the path line of the MVP or the ACP? Your personal property?
No, my personal property is actually affected by another pipeline.
Which one?
My property is in Frederick County, Virginia, on Back Creek, and it borders Berkeley County, West Virginia.
Okay.
So the Mountaineer pipeline.
The Mountaineer.
And the Rockwell facility would they're horizontal directional drilling underneath Back Creek right now, as well as Sleepy Creek, to put a pipeline in to feed this Rockwell facility that will be burning tons of coal and make the air practically unbreathable. And again, West Virginia, we get the short end of the stick a lot of times over there in West Virginia. So I'm here because I've been invited to these communities. I get invited to communities in crisis to lead interfaith prayers. So I've been to a lot of these communities and been part of and prayed with them for the clean water, because this is a not only are we fighting for our lives, but this is what we need to do as real spiritual healing. Because right now we also have a problem with bigotry masquerading as religion, right? And religious freedom is now somehow your right to discriminate, not your right to practice actual religion. So that's what we're doing here. We're practicing our religion, and we're protecting our water because we want our children to be able to drink clean water, and their children and their children.
Clean water that doesn't come from a plastic bottle.
That's right. Yep.
All right. Kira, thank you so much for coming out today and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Well, I'm wondering what's taking...
Minus all the Carlin words.
Oh, okay. That's right. We're on the radio.
We have Carlin rules.
So I'm wondering at the moment, what is taking the State Water Control Board so long in closed session? I'm hoping that they're taking so long because they're in there discussing what it's going to take to issue a stop work order. Right now, while we wait for the hearing process for the revocation of the 401 permits, which we have proven over and over and over again is justified. Over 300 violations currently documented and in a lawsuit filed by Mark Herring, our Attorney General. Most of those violations were documented by citizens because the DEQ has really not done their job. And I think it's time that the Citizens Board, the State Water Control Board, tells the DEQ to do their damn job. And they're not. So really, considering the state of politics in Virginia right now, I think that this particular decision-making body, consisting of citizens from across the Commonwealth, is our best shot at getting what we need. Because I live in the middle of the apocalypse. I'm 5 minutes away from where they have plowed under the Blue Ridge Parkway, over the top of Poor Mountain. They've endangered people's water, farms. I mean, there's just 2 days ago, they dropped erosion control pellets from helicopters on a farm that was seeking organic certification. They can't get that now because of what they did. And it's utterly reprehensible what this corporation, EQT, from Pittsburgh, is getting away with. They're terrorizing communities. They're abusing landowners.
And isn't it, I was under the impression that in the state of Virginia, a state-owned corporation that is providing a service to Virginians could access eminent domain. But as I understand it, EQT doesn't have any ties to Virginia itself. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Other than wanting to build a project here.
Yes, but because it's an interstate pipeline.
But they were still able to use eminent domain.
Yes.
Particularly in areas that are being affected in the Roanoke region for the Mountain Valley Pipeline. There are other spaces coming through with the ACP, but a lot of that's been held up in courts where so much of the activity is actually happening in the southwest of the state. Well, and I think a lot of our listeners, because we're here in Richmond, really aren't aware of it because they can't see it.
Right.
It's not happening on a daily basis in their lives, and
it's true.
It's out of sight, out of mind. Not that they want it to happen, but that they're just not. They can't see it happening, so they just don't understand. But you guys that are out there every day, I was talking with a couple of scientists across the room a little bit earlier today, looking at photographs that were not allowed to come in and be submitted to the State Water Control Board today, showing this incredible destruction, the amount of erosion that's taking place, creek beds that are actually falling in, and so that's going to turn into an area that's more marsh rather than still having a defined creek, cattle that have had to move out of a region because the land will no longer support them while this project takes place.
Yeah, and I want to make something perfectly clear. EQT, the primary investor in this project, they're frackers. They engage in fracking in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. They have committed multiple criminal acts, both environmentally and otherwise. There's so many lawsuits against this corporation, and you're right. If you don't see it, it's hard to believe it. This is why Roberta Kellum, a former member of the State Water Control Board, came to Southwest Virginia. She saw the destruction firsthand. She thanked the community for performing the service that they have. Our Mountain Valley Watch people, we have citizen documenters who are watching them every step of the way. And those are the violations that are being reported. Not the DEQ inspectors, not the people who are supposed to be out there making sure that they're doing this right. It's us, and they're not doing it right. And we keep showing up and saying so. But, Roberta was let go. She was dismissed from the board. She asked too many questions, and it's not the board here. It's the DEQ. And I'm hoping that the board feels empowered to speak truth to power like we're having to. I hope that the board is willing to exercise its authority in this scenario, because they do have the authority to issue a stop work order. They should. I hope that they will. And we're not going away. We're here. We've been here over 4.5 years. I've been coming to Richmond since July of 2017 to these meetings, meeting after meeting after meeting. Legitimate information again and again and again. Well, we're making the moral argument now. It's not that we've exhausted legitimate means. You know why? We don't have a stop work order. Therefore, the violations are continuing. Therefore, we have them. If we had a voice here and we could present them to the board, that would be great, but we don't. The board is basically meeting to decide when we have these hearings. And in the meantime, they need to stop work on the MVP, and prevent the destruction from happening with the ACP, because construction hasn't started yet. I mean, can we prevent the harm that's already been done in Southwest Virginia, in Central Virginia? I hope so. Yeah, I sure hope so. And I mean, I'm here for our water. I have around my neck here, Stephanie.
I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah.
So this is, for those of you who can't see, because you're listening on the radio, Marla is wearing a scarf of some sort. It's enormous, and it is covered in these tiny little blue flags, each of them labeled for a body of water in the state of Virginia. How many flags are you wearing?
There's 300 and some on this strand. This is all of the named water bodies that would be crossed by the Mountain Valley Pipeline.
So it's the Mountain Valley Pipeline.
Yeah, I also have a strand in the car that's all of the ACP crossings. The interesting thing about this, Stephanie, is that each one of these water bodies, many of them, are crossed multiple times. So, like, if you find the flag that says Bottom Creek, that's Bottom Creek in Bent Mountain, Virginia. Mary Beth Coffey, who's over on the other side of the room, has a strand of flags around her neck that consist only of Bottom Creek, 36 Bottom Creek flags, because that's how many times it would cross a Tier 3 waterway. That is pristine water, designated by the DEQ. Took over a decade to get that designation, and now they want to plow through it 36 times. So, anyway, this is 1,000 Flags, 1,000 Waters. You can find us on online, waterflags.org, or 1,000 Flags, 1,000 Waters on Facebook. You can make your own. We have easy-to-do instructions.
I saw a cute little video yesterday showing how to make a water flag. And you guys also still have some T-shirts for sale?
Yes, we do.
What do they say?
They say, "Our water, our lives" on the front, and "Water Protector" on the back. We need all of our water protectors to step up and defend our waters. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My name is Grace Terry, and I'm here today to represent my family. We have miles of pipeline going through our property in Roanoke County on the top of Bent Mountain, which is the home of Bottom Creek, a Tier 3 stream. And I was hoping to be able to speak to the State Water Control Board today, because what I wanted to tell them, first of all, is we'd like for them to come see the route. We feel that they have not actually seen the terrain that the pipeline is being built over on Bent Mountain. To get to Bent Mountain, the pipeline is crossing Poor Mountain, and a lot of people don't realize that the greatest elevation change in the state of Virginia is from the Elliston Valley, where the Roanoke River is, to the top of Poor Mountain. So Poor Mountain is not the highest peak in Virginia, but that is the greatest elevation change, and that's where this pipeline is going. And that has never made sense to us. And in addition to that, we have very clean water. As I said, we have a Tier 3 stream.
I was going to ask if you'd explain to our listeners what a Tier 3 water body is in the state of Virginia.
Okay, so that means that stream has been designated special waters of Virginia, exceptional waters, and it's based on a set of criteria that's determined from the Environmental Protection Agency.
And it really rates the cleanliness of the water and the purity of the water?
Yes, and not only that, the biological life in the water. Mm-hmm. So it's home to native trout. And because it's such a unique, water body, so like there are 10 Tier 3 streams in Virginia, this is the only one that passes through private property. And the others are in national forest or in places that are, have those protections. But this is a stream that begins on private property. And so the section that's designated Tier 3 is in a Nature Conservancy Preserve, and people can hike there, and it's beautiful. And if you have the chance, go see the kettles of Bottom Creek. So because of the cleanliness of the water...
How did they get to cross an area that's been conserved?
The creek, you mean?
Yes. How are they able to cross an area that's under conservation?
Okay, no, I'm just saying that the creek runs, the section of the creek that got that Tier 3 designation is within that nature preserve.
Oh, okay.
But upstream of it, upstream, the creek is all on private property, and a good portion of it runs through my family's land. And because of that, DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, the people that we're here to see today, chose Bottom Creek to put 2 of their 6 testing sites. And that means that they are, took baseline data in a project with the USGS. They put a real-time monitoring device in the water that is constantly monitoring the physical characteristics of the stream, like water temperature, sediment, and those types of things. But they also, as part of this testing that they told the public that would be done to protect the water quality, they also had a component of biological testing, and that was being done by the Department of Environmental Quality staff themselves. They're biologists. Who live locally, live in the Roanoke area. So the USGS, the real-time monitoring device, that remains. That's still in the stream. It's had some rough times with the winter weather and a tree almost knocking it out and that sort of thing, but it's been in the stream since the fall of 2017. So in December of 2017, the State Water Control Board voted to allow MVP to have a water permit. And at that meeting, the Water Control Board was told about this testing program. And so prior to that, they had done the biological testing, which means that they look for macroinvertebrates at the bottom of the stream to test the health of the creek. They look for what's living in there, what supports the food chain, what's at the bottom. And then they also did fish samples. They took fish samples, and all of the results were outstanding. So and I'm talking about the site on my family's property. Even higher up upstream of us, it was slightly better even. Our results were great, but they were even better on a neighbor's property higher up on Poor Mountain. What I wanted the Water Control Board to know today, in case they had not been informed of this by DEQ, is that biological monitoring was pulled for this fall. So it should have been, the fish sampling can only be done in the fall. For some reason they don't do it in the spring. I don't know, I'm not a biologist, but that aspect of the testing was just canceled. And I believe that the DEQ employees were told something about that they didn't want them out there when construction was going on. Well, there's been no construction in that area. Now they did cross the Blue Ridge Parkway, but that's miles from where my family's property is and the site that's upstream of us on Poor Mountain. So the 2 testing sites, one on Poor Mountain, one on Bet Mountain, both in Roanoke County, did not get the fish sampling. And native trout are a resource that you can actually, file a lawsuit. That's a resource that is, what's the word? It's
irreplaceable?
Yes, I guess, but you can actually go for damages if
Oh, absolutely. No, because they're protected because they're commercialized in the state of Virginia.
And I guess what is upsetting to us is that we would expect that in the intervening year between fall of 2017 and 2018, that there would be high potential that the biological life would have been affected because so many acres of trees were removed.
Yes.
And yet that data is not being collected, and that was what I wanted to tell the State Water Control Board today.
So the mechanism for finding those results is still in place, but it is no longer being monitored by the people who put it there? Or did they actually take the equipment out?
The physical equipment for the physical monitoring, like temperature, turbidity, that type of thing, that equipment is still in there. That's been being done by USGS. But you don't have a biological, and the 2 work in concert. You need to know both, and that's what the landowners were promised. And it's not the fault of the biologist. They had understood that this is what they were going to do, and that was, they got the landowners' permission and agreement, and now the plug was pulled, so to speak.
Okay.
And I don't think the Water Control Board knows that, and they should.
Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty. Thank you
All
so
right.
much for
Thank you so much for
sharing
letting me-
for sharing your experience
Yes,
with us.
thank you.
Anyway, Midlothian, we are at the Doubletree Hotel at the State Water Control Board hearing, and I have with me Delegate Chris Hurst from the Roanoke region, and he has come in to share his thoughts about this as well. I'm going to hand you the lower microphone because that's the one that goes with the camera that's watching you. This one's for the radio, so if you'll go ahead and get your chin pretty close.
Sure.
And I'll kind of get this up in the air so that you don't have to stoop. There we go.
Yeah.
So go ahead, just introduce yourself and let us know what you'd like to share with our listeners.
Sure. My name is Chris Hurst. I'm the delegate for the 12th District. That's Blacksburg, Radford, Giles County, and part of Pulaski County. Here at the State Water Control Board meeting, now that the General Assembly session is over, there still is a lot of work to be done to try and get equity and fairness in this process. And unfortunately, you're having to fill time, as it were, because we're just sitting around waiting with a closed session in place right now with the State Water Control Board. I'm still not exactly sure what the validity of putting it into closed session is. Certainly, you can cite various sections of the code, but what is the real necessity for it to be in closed session, I think, is still a question for me. This is yet another step in a now 5-year-long process that has been led by landowners and advocates, has not been led by legislators or people in power, and that's been really disconcerting to me. It's part of the reason why I decided to run for office in the first place. I think that this situation with the Mountain Valley Pipeline and Atlantic Coast Pipeline is case example. It's Exhibit A of everything that is wrong with our government and everything that is wrong with the way we actually empower people to be in ownership of their lives and in ownership of their own communities. And what we're talking about here today is a possible and hopeful revocation of a Section 401 certificate that clearly, on its own merit, whether you look at the pending lawsuit that DEQ had the Attorney General's office file on its own behalf, or you just look at all of the pictures and documents. And I've been out on private property that's impacted by the MVP, and you just see that there aren't proper erosion and sedimentation controls in place, that you do have runoff water that is full of dirt and chemicals and God knows what else that's flowing into tributaries and into headwaters that go into people's private wells. That's something that people who live in more urban, suburban areas, it may be lost on, but we have some of the most pristine drinking water in the entire country that comes from the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains. And unfortunately, what people have been living off of for their drinking water for generations is under threat. We've been doing case studies and casework in our own office for landowners who have seen that their private well has either dried up or has changed in the amount of available water that they can draw from. And all of that mounting evidence should be enough to want to either do a stop work order or have another full hearing of the State Water Control Board to think about possible revocation. So what are we waiting for? I know who we're waiting for right now at 12:45, but what are we waiting for? I think everybody knows that there's something wrong here, and we need to start fixing this problem instead of just kicking the can down the road.
I absolutely think that you're right about that. What is it that our citizens, our listeners, what is it that they can be doing that's going to get to our elected officials and get to folks like the State Water Control Board or the DEQ? What is it that citizens can do, empower themselves to get this stop work order happening?
So I'm newly elected, was elected in 2017, and one of the things that I have found first that is pretty clear when you get into the legislature is that when you hear from people in Virginia that aren't necessarily in your district, a lot of lawmakers are going to put that off in its own separate file, never really to be looked at with any real seriousness. And so what people listening to this need to do who are motivated to want to take a course of action is to reach out to their own delegate and their own senator, because I can tell you that they probably aren't real active on this issue. We have probably a half a dozen of us who, as lawmakers, have really decided to step up, and with our own political capital at stake to try and do what we think is right for the people of Virginia, especially the people impacted by these two pipelines. And so you need to reach out, whether you're in Henrico County or Chesterfield or the city of Richmond, wherever you are, you need to reach out to your own local officials and tell them that this is an issue that is important to you, and that if we can get a growing chorus of those people who reach out to their own legislator, that's the way that we can actually start to build momentum.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming over and talking to us again. And Talk to me a little bit about what we've already seen lost. I know that we have a particular native type of trout that is at risk. I know that there is a frog. I know that there's a salamander. I'm trying to remember what else there was, and maybe some kind of a bat. There were several that I'm serious. I've been following this for a while, so.
Yes, they actually changed the route of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline because of the endangered species through certain areas. The salamander that was endangered for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, it's the Roanoke log perch, which is a fish down in the Roanoke County area. It's a rare species, and there's been a lot of sediment in the rivers in that area, and we're pretty sure that they've killed off a number of endangered species because of that sediment. When you get sediment in rivers, it chokes the fish and kills them, and along with other biota and aquatic wildlife. So, yeah, and unfortunately, I'm afraid the damage is going to continue after construction is complete because they can't stabilize these areas very well. It'll take years to recover.
Talk to me about what it would take, not in terms of time length, but what it would actually take to restabilize these areas that have been destroyed.
Yeah, they'd have to go back in and plant a lot of grass seed and put in jute mesh and mats to stabilize the steep areas. And they've been doing that to a certain extent, but those protective measures that were required are also failing in the field during construction. They just won't stand up under the steep slope conditions.
Right. And talk to me a little bit about the DEQ responsibility with that, because I know that it was requested prior to any construction starting that DEQ perform a stream-by-stream analysis, so an analysis of every single water crossing that either of these pipelines would potentially cross was supposed to have been personally examined by DEQ. And instead, they went with a recommendation provided by FERC that they just go ahead and go one big water permit.
Yeah, the nationwide 12 permit, which, by the way, was vacated. They can't cross any streams now because they don't have a permit to cross any streams, and that's still outstanding. That's just one of the permits that's not in place right now.
My question about that is, since they're not, quote-unquote, crossing any streams, but the work that they've already done has eroded and collapsed creek beds,
around the
has
crossings,
damaged marshland already, then they effectively are crossing water bodies. Even though they're quote-unquote not working there yet.
Right.
So why has that not triggered an automatic stop?
Because DEQ is not doing the job that we need them to do. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay.
That we've reported hundreds of violations to DEQ. We just haven't gotten the response that we think we need. And they are not quite doing their job, in my opinion. Now, part of that is because they don't have the staff to do the job, and that became very obvious from the beginning. These are huge projects. They're hundreds of miles long, and they don't have the staff to inspect.
And in the case of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, refresh my memory, I think it's a little over 300 miles long?
303 miles.
Not including the new leg that would then join up to someplace in North Carolina to get them to their newly acquired Energy Corporation in South Carolina.
Yes.
So the original was a little over 300, is that right?
303 miles.
303 miles. And the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is a little over 600?
It's 590 miles.
Okay, just under 600. Right.
Plus, they have a 20-inch spur or 24-inch spur into Chesapeake area.
Right.
Also.
Right. Okay, thank you. And so we are talking about over 900 miles.
That's correct.
Worth of pipeline crisscrossing
Virginia and North
beautiful
Carolina.
State of Virginia, putting its homeowners, property owners, people, animals, fish, everything that lives anywhere on the surface.
The property owners are the ones
and below the surface, because they're digging. There's all kinds of, I've been really shocked at the plans for this, and I've discussed this with a couple of people today. With your engineering background, one of the things that's disturbed me most about this story is the fact that the CEO of EQT who is the major corporate holder for the construction of the MVP, correct?
Yes.
That the CEO of EQT actually called this an engineering marvel, and that as of 2 years ago, they still hadn't quite figured out how they were going to build something that could cross such a steep mountain range.
Well, nobody's crossed these mountains ever in the history of this country with these types of mountains. Pipelines, and they're too steep, and the terrain is too difficult. And they're full of stone, rock, just under the surface of the dirt. So, it's an engineering disaster. That's what I call it.
Right.
Not a miracle?
Not a miracle. Not
That's
at all.
What bothered me in that was that the people responsible, first and foremost, for the building of the pipeline, and secondly, for underwriting their own project because they cannot get insured to do so, can't figure out how it's going to happen, but is real excited to see it.
Well,
I find terrifying.
Yeah, well, I want to mention one thing, that the reason why they're building these pipelines is for the profit. The bottom line is the large amount of profit they can possibly make. Okay, they can go up to 15% return on equity. If we were talking about 3 or 4% return, you and I wouldn't be standing here talking today. But that distorts the entire incentive for them to build these pipelines when they do that.
I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the things that we know that's happened since this project was first pitched to what's happening today is how much the cost has increased.
Yes.
It is well over doubled. A project that was somewhere in the $300 billion range.
$4.5 billion for the ACP.
And now we're over 7.5.
That's correct. Okay.
And it's not yet begun.
And that's a disincentive.
Largely not yet begun.
That's a disincentive to the stockholders. They're beginning to get really worried now that they're not going to make the 15% profit that they were promised. And with continued rising costs, it's not going to be possible.
Right. So the money that has the money that the company is going to have to put out to continue to build this project is now potentially biting into the profit margin.
Yes, it
because
is.
What they are guaranteed federally is a 14% return on investment.
14 to 15%.
So they're guaranteed that. Now, that's what I found most disturbing when I began to understand that, because regardless of whether they spend $3 or $4 billion or $7.5 billion, they are still guaranteed 14% of what they spend returned by the federal government. And there's nothing about that that's okay.
Yeah, that's really distorted the
because
entire...
all of that money literally comes out of the pockets of Virginia ratepayers.
For the ACP. Now, for the MVP, it's a different story. It comes out of the pocketbooks of stockholders.
Entirely?
Yes, pretty much, except for Con Edison. Okay, they're one of the partners in the MVP pipeline. So their ratepayers would be affected.
Okay.
But primarily for the ACP, the ratepayers would be affected. For the MVP, stockholders are the ones who are on the hook for the money. And stockholders are not real happy right now with the MVP, like I said, because they're having huge cost overruns. Plus, they're also having problems. EQT is financially on the verge of possible bankrupt.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I was unaware of that myself.
Yep.
The other question that I have for you, since you have been studying this for so long, is these pipelines ultimately go back to Canadian tar sands. I mean, ultimately, when we really take a look at how far things are coming, what's being connected to what. So this really is still attached to all of those other various projects that we have been trying collectively. I believe a lot of us that are working for an environmental solution, that we have collectively been fighting against for years and years and years, long before the project started here in Virginia. So we could relate this very easily to what happened in Standing Rock. We could relate this very easily to the efforts to stop the Keystone XL.
It's similar, but the source of the gas is coming out of the fracking fields of West Virginia and Pennsylvania, the Marcellus, and that's what started this whole thing, was trying to get the gas out of the Marcellus region to markets. But we call it, it's a race. It really is, because there's about 12 other pipelines that are in the pipeline. Some of them already been built, okay? And some of these pipelines, like the Atlantic Sunrise, are serving the same markets as the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So they're in competition.
Oh.
Okay. And the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline has already been built. So they're already ahead of the game. Now that also decreases demand for MVP gas because they're not able to get the gas out to the markets as quickly as the Atlantic Sunrise. You've also got the WB Express, which is another pipeline that was recently completed in West Virginia, and that can serve the ACP areas, the regions, for their markets.
Really?
Yep. So now, you've got
between the existing
competing
Transco
pipelines,
line, the
WB Express and the Atlantic Sunrise.
And the Atlantic Sunrise, that literally negates the need for either the MVP or the ACP.
Yes, that's
100% in the amount that they are talking about shipping in, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did y'all hear me?
Yep. We knew this going in. We call it the Southeast race to the Marcellus to the Southeast race for pipelines.
Okay. All right. Well, gosh, I really appreciate you sharing that because I learned some new stuff about the pipelines today, guys.
Me too. I'm just a camera.
I've been doing this a long time.
Yes, and we appreciate all of your efforts. So tell our listeners and viewers, we've got that one on us now too, what can you be doing right now, today, tomorrow, in order to make this stop?
What
How
can
do we
we
stop
do?
this thing?
Yeah, continue working and pressuring Attorney General Herring to issue a stop work order now.
Okay.
That's what we need. So people can
So go
write
call
in.
Attorney General Herring
Mark Herring.
today. Anybody got his number for me? You're going to get it for me? Thanks.
Phone number for Mark Herring?
We're going to send everybody to you, Mark Herring. Who else?
Continuing pressuring the State Water Control Board to do the right thing.
Alrighty.
That's another one. We also need our legislators in the General Assembly to pay more attention to the issues.
And I was speaking with Delegate Hurst earlier today.
Okay.
One of the things that he shared with me was that while this is happening in his region, that he still is not really able to respond to folks who don't live in his district. I mean, he could, but he has his own people to deal with.
Exactly.
So it's really important that even though this pipeline might not impact you here in Chesterfield because it's not running across your property, it is going to impact you because you're still using the same air and water. It's important for you to contact your very own delegate, your very own state senator, whoever it is that is there for your district, and put pressure on them to continue to create a coalition within our own legislative body.
Yeah, so the pipelines really affect everybody because of the large volume of greenhouse gas emissions they create. 95 million tons of additional greenhouse gas emissions would be created by these pipelines. And we only have 49.7 million tons in the state now. So it's actually more than doubling the greenhouse gas emissions. So that affects everyone
It certainly
in the
does.
state.
That's enormous. I didn't realize it would double it.
Yep, at least. And it could go up to 150 million.
Okay, and so I have contact information. If you would like to get in touch with Attorney General Mark Herring, please do so. His telephone number is 804-786-2071.
Yep, that's really important. I think the greenhouse gas emissions and the huge volume.
Well, one of the other things that I learned about today was we were talking about the escaping methane, so that there is an accepted over-under, if you will, that you're going to lose at least 3%.
Yeah, the leakage rate.
Leakage through the entire pipeline system. And that is an expected amount. And it's going to be pure methane escaping directly from the pipeline, going directly into the air. So if you're anywhere near it, super toxic. If you're anywhere adjacent to it, still really toxic.
You mean just leaks at the pumping station?
Not even the compressor station. This is the entire pipeline is going to be leaking at least 3% of its own gas the entire length.
two major sources of leakage are at the wellhead where they're doing the fracking.
Heard of that? Yeah.
And then there's leakage in the pipe and at the compressor stations.
Yep.
Primarily.
And then I heard it. Okay, and so then the compressor stations, we should talk a little bit further about the compressor stations. Or not, because the State Water Control Board has just re-entered the room. So
Yes.
we are going to shut this part down so that we can get back to being focused on them. Kirk Bowers with the Sierra Club, thank you again so much for coming and talking to us and sharing your experience.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's hope for a good result.
Thank you.